Imagine signing a peace treaty in Geneva that instantly triggers a war in Lebanon.
Right. It's a massive paradox.
It really is.
Mhm.
When you picture a traditional news broadcast, think back to the network anchors of the 1960s, there was a certain comfort in that delivery.
Oh, absolutely. The anchor sat calmly at a desk, the geopolitical map behind them was static, and the lines of conflict were drawn in bold, predictable ink.
Yeah, you had clear adversaries, clear treaties, and a crisis was just a discrete event. The guns fired, negotiations happened, and then the guns stopped.
But it was a very linear, binary way of understanding the world, and we are deeply conditioned to view global events that way.
Right. We expect order.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We expect a signed diplomatic agreement to immediately translate into absolute peace on the ground.
But looking at the intelligence landscape today, that static 1960s map is entirely obsolete. A diplomatic signature in a European capital can simultaneously trigger localized escalations thousands of miles away.
It's completely interconnected.
It is. So understanding this dynamic requires looking past the headlines and examining the underlying mechanics, which is exactly what we're doing today.
Right. We are separating the geopolitical signal from the noise, objectively, and without generating fear.
And this deep dive is made possible by our sponsor, ProWave AI. The comprehensive intelligence we are unpacking today is generated entirely by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application.
And we should mention, Stylo News is actually the consumer version of Stylo Intel Ops.
Right, which is software normally restricted to enterprise operations across government, military, and global business sectors.
So for this analysis, you, the listener, are getting unique access to the exact same analytical tool designed to support global decision makers.
Which is critical given the complexity of the data we're reviewing today.
Well, without a doubt.
So today's focus is the Middle East Crisis Update, 18 June 2026. We are conducting a special 2-week analysis covering the region as of today's date.
And to do this, we're utilizing a strict analytical framework built on 3 interconnected strategic questions.
Right. First, can Iran and its regional partners preserve their military capabilities and impose costs through proxy forces?
Second, can the United States and allied Middle Eastern nations effectively degrade those capabilities and return to diplomacy?
And third, can Israel protect its population while shaping conditions for a sustainable peace?
Because, these are not isolated tactical events. They are interconnected challenges that influence regional stability, global markets, and energy security.
So let's start with the biggest diplomatic anchor of the past 2 weeks. The core event is that the United States and Iran have electronically signed a Memorandum of Understanding, or a MO, in Geneva.
Right. And we are looking at a 14-point ceasefire framework here.
Yeah, establishing a 60-day negotiation window. It outlines the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and includes a potential $300 billion reconstruction and sanctions relief concept.
But, a treaty is only as strong as the motivations of the people signing it.
Exactly. If I'm Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, I have to be looking at this as a massive win.
Oh, absolutely.
I get my sanctions relief, I get an economic lifeline, and I don't have to give up my network of regional proxy armies. Is that how Tehran is reading this?
That is the exact calculation in Tehran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, they view this framework as a total strategic victory.
Wow.
Yeah. From their vantage point, the MOU preserves their core geopolitical assets.
And on the other side of the table, United States President Donald Trump is prioritizing risk management, right?
Correct. The U.S. objective is to manage regional volatility.
Mm-hmm.
So they're opting to leave U.S. forces in the Gulf temporarily, while pragmatically accepting Iran's ballistic missile capabilities relative to other actors.
And the regional neighbors, the Gulf Cooperation Council, countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they seem to be backing this simply to keep the cargo ships moving.
Exactly. They're prioritizing trade and economic stability over ideological conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at this framework, it feels like putting a diplomatic Band-Aid on a structural fracture.
That's a good way to put it.
If the underlying proxy networks, the militias funded and armed by Iran, remain entirely untouched by this agreement, we aren't actually restoring deterrence.
Right.
We are just hitting the pause button on the state-on-state conflict, aren't we?
We are. And that is the defining structural flaw of this geopolitical moment. We really have to look at the mechanics of deterrence here.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, the MOU successfully shifts the immediate risk away from an overt state-on-state war between the U.S. and Iran. It basically freezes the top tier of the escalation ladder.
Okay.
But by leaving the proxy networks intact, It leaves the door wide open for indirect, deniable coercion. The structural fracture is Iran's ability to project power through non-state actors.
Right.
Because the Geneva MOU does not dismantle that capability, the friction simply moves down the escalation ladder, and it concentrates heavily on local flashpoints.
And that burst pipe in the basement is currently flooding Israel's northern border. Because the MOU leaves those networks intact, the most immediate, volatile friction point has shifted straight to Lebanon.
Yeah, and the situation there is escalating rapidly.
It really is. Despite a 45-day ceasefire extension mediated by the U.S., Israel is heavily escalating strikes in southern Lebanon.
We are seeing major operations in the Nabati district and Kfar Tebnit, specifically targeting Hezbollah.
And Hezbollah is heavily retaliating. This exchange just resulted in the recent death of IDF Master Sergeant Alexander Fulin.
And overall, the human cost has been staggering. I mean, over 3,884 people have been killed and 11,856 wounded in Lebanon since this escalation began.
That is just wow. And Israel's military establishment is basically saying, look, this treaty doesn't solve our Hezbollah problems, so we are keeping our finger on the trigger, treaty or no treaty.
Exactly. The perspectives driving this local escalation are fundamentally incompatible with the Geneva diplomatic track.
Right.
Prime Minister Netanyahu views the MOU as a strategic setback. He believes it fails to neutralize the existential threat on Israel's northern border.
So they are maintaining full readiness for unilateral military escalation.
Yes. Meanwhile, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun is asserting an independent negotiation stance. He's really trying to separate Lebanon's security from the broader U.S. Iran talks.
But, I mean, he leads a highly fragile government that structurally cannot control Hezbollah's military apparatus.
Which is exactly the problem. And internationally, this localized friction is causing massive allied fractures.
Yeah, we saw U.S. President Trump publicly criticize Israeli military tactics as excessive during the recent G7 summit.
We did. And that allied friction actually mirrors the deep divisions we're seeing in public perception right now.
So let's look at that. The Intelligence Data Monitoring X, formerly Twitter, shows a highly polarized environment.
Very polarized. Roughly 40% of monitored users express pro-Israel sentiments, really focusing on the justification of strikes against Iranian proxies to secure national borders.
Okay, and the other side?
Another 40% express pro-resistance sentiments. They are heavily condemning Israeli military aggression and focusing on the devastating civilian harm in Lebanon.
And I assume the remaining 20% are just watching the markets.
Basically, yes. They maintain a neutral, market-watchful tone, just tracking the stability.
Okay, so if Israel feels the diplomatic track completely abandons their security needs, and Hezbollah vehemently rejects any peace plans that involve their own disarmament, how does this not trigger the exact regional war the Geneva MOU is trying to prevent?
Well, the intelligence assessment indicates that an off-ramp is highly unlikely in the near term.
Really?
Yeah. The most probable course of action is sustained, limited military exchanges. Israel will continue attempting to degrade Hezbollah's infrastructure tactically.
Well, Hezbollah will continue to fire rockets to maintain its resistance narrative.
Right. The real danger here is miscalculation.
Like what?
A single mass casualty event or a visible surge in Iranian funding to Hezbollah. Either of those could easily collapse this localized containment and trigger a broader theater war.
And that exact same structural roadblock trying to dismantle a deeply entrenched militia is what's totally freezing the map hundreds of miles south in Gaza.
It's the same fundamental issue, yes.
Over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces since the October 2025 ceasefire.
And Israeli troops now control over half of the Gaza Strip, operating right near the demarcated Yellow Line buffer zone.
Concurrently, the West Bank is facing total economic collapse,
driven by severe movement restrictions, the withholding of revenues, and the revocation of Palestinian work permits.
Which brings us to a critical analytical judgment regarding our strategic framework. Will Hamas disarm?
The intelligence assessment across all reliable sources is a highly confident no.
I mean, I imagine they see keeping those weapons as their only life insurance policy.
They absolutely do. Hamas retains overwhelming strategic incentives to keep its weapons.
Right.
Arms are required for their organizational survival, for deterrence against internal Palestinian rivals, and to maintain bargaining leverage over any post-war governance structure.
That makes sense from their perspective.
Furthermore, the intelligence window identifies absolutely no internal leadership fractures within Hamas. Nor is there any credible third-party enforcement architecture capable of coercing them to surrender their weapons.
So they're not going to hand them over voluntarily. and no one is forcing them to.
Exactly.
And the pressure regarding this stalemate is mounting globally. Institutions like the International Crisis Group and the International Court of Justice are issuing severe warnings.
Yes, they are stating that the ongoing occupation and the economic deprivation in the West Bank are illegal under international law,
And that they are actively fueling massive long-term instability.
which creates an immense complication for Israel. They are expanding tactical control on the ground, but they are losing strategic diplomatic support globally.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you synthesize all this, we are looking at a massive paradox.
How so?
Well, if international stabilization forces refuse to enter Gaza until Hamas disarms, and Hamas absolutely refuses to disarm for the reasons we just covered, aren't we just looking at a permanent militarized holding pattern?
Functionally, yes.
Wow.
The absence of a credible disarmament pathway blocks reconstruction. It completely prevents the deployment of any international stabilization mechanism.
Right.
Unless there is overwhelming coercion combined with an amnesty or exile framework backed by an international coalition, Gaza remains a militarized, localized conflict zone with no viable political horizon.
Okay, so if you are listening to this and watching global supply chains right now, the local gridlock we just talked about is about to hit your wallet.
It absolutely is.
Because that local gridlock in the Levant radiates outward, directly impacting the maritime threat and the outer ring.
Yes, let's look at the maritime choke points.
Under the new MOU, the Strait of Hormuz is slated to reopen. But the reality on the water is that Iran's IRGC retains the full, intact capability to shut it down at a moment's notice.
They do, and we are still seeing reports of nightly drone launches.
Right.
This is a perfect example of how Iran exercises coercive leverage. The MOU may dictate that the strait is open, but Iran does not need to overtly blockade the waterway to cause massive economic damage.
Because they possess such sophisticated asymmetric naval capability.
Exactly. Anti-ship missiles, one-way attack drones, fast attack craft, and naval mines. They can implement episodic disruption.
You've described this in the past as a rheostat, like a dial they can turn up or down.
That's a great analogy, yes.
They can shadow commercial vessels, demand transit fees, or conduct isolated drone attacks.
Right. And even if they don't sink a single ship, they cause massive insurance shocks.
Which means shipping companies reroute, global energy prices spike, and Iran gets to signal its displeasure with the diplomatic process without ever triggering a conventional war.
It is highly effective economic warfare.
Let's look at the other major maritime corridor, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, controlled by the Houthis in Yemen.
The internal situation in Yemen right now is incredibly volatile.
Yeah, there is severe internal unrest. It's being referred to in the reporting as the Al-Farshan Revolution.
We are seeing massive protests in southern Yemen, in Aden, Sayun, and right outside the Mashik presidential palace.
People are protesting the total collapse of basic services, and security forces are reportedly using live ammunition against demonstrators.
It's a tragic situation.
But doesn't this internal collapse cripple the Houthis' ability to launch missiles at ships?
You would think so, but it actually does not. And the reason why is crucial.
Okay.
The Houthis operate their military command and control out of the northern highlands. They are completely insulated from the economic collapse happening in the southern government-held territories.
The protests in Aden are essentially happening in a different political universe.
Exactly. The internationally recognized Yemeni government is highly unstable. They lack political solutions to the underlying economic grievances of the protesters.
Right.
But this internal chaos does not immediately degrade the Houthis' separate military infrastructure.
So the Bab el-Mandeb remains a high-risk transit zone, regardless of the protests in the south. The Houthis maintain a latent, highly credible threat to Israel and international shipping.
They absolutely do.
What about the neighbors? Looking at Jordan, they are geographically surrounded by this chaos.
They're in a very tough spot.
You've got Israel and the West Bank to the west, Syria to the north. I would assume they are on high alert, locking down embassies, bracing for a direct hit.
It's actually more subtle than that. The intelligence review found no direct, specific threats to Western embassies in Jordan, such as the U.S. Embassy in Amman, or military installations like the Muwafaq Salti Air Base.
Okay, that's good news.
It is, but Jordan faces a unique, persistent structural vulnerability to indirect threats.
Spillover.
Precisely. They face spillover from ISIS activity and violent unrest in neighboring Syria, particularly in the Tadmor and Homs regions.
Right.
There is also the constant risk of airspace disruptions and refugee pressures resulting from the ongoing Israeli military consolidation in southern Syria and the fighting in Lebanon.
So Jordan's threat picture is tactically quiet right now, but highly vulnerable to rapid regional changes.
Exactly.
So if you are tracking global markets or regional stability, you should be monitoring for highly specific, localized indicators in these critical waters.
What should they be looking for?
Well, watch for any confirmed reports of the IRGC attempting to regulate commercial traffic in Hormuz or any instances of unsafe naval intercepts and drone harassment.
Right.
And in the Red Sea, monitor for any renewed Houthi anti-shipping strikes. These asymmetric, deniable actions are the most likely vectors for rapid market disruption in the near term.
So synthesizing our three strategic lines of analysis today, the picture is complex but clear.
Let's summarize it.
First, the U.S. Iran Memorandum of Understanding has temporarily frozen the risk of overt state-on-state conventional conflict.
Okay.
Second, because that agreement leaves Iran's proxy networks completely intact, localized proxy warfare remains highly active and destructive, particularly in southern Lebanon and Gaza. And third, the global maritime economy remains structurally insecure, subject to the coercive leverage of the IRGC in Hormuz and the Houthis in the Red Sea.
So the region has achieved a diplomatic framework, but it definitely has not achieved stability.
That's a perfect way to summarize it. It's the difference between signing a piece of paper and actually changing the reality on the ground.
And tracking that reality as it shifts minute by minute is exactly what Stylo News is built for.
Absolutely.
As we mentioned at the top of the deep dive, Stylo News is a mobile and computer application that allows you to download and customize personal intelligence-style briefs.
It's incredibly powerful.
It is. It draws from hundreds of traditional news sources and social platforms like X, processing it all through an AI vector pipeline.
So rather than just giving you a list of articles, it's essentially a way for the AI to read millions of seemingly unrelated data points and connect the dots in milliseconds.
Right. It gives you access to capabilities like pattern of life analysis.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. That means tracking daily human habits and logistical movements to predict future actions. It's the exact kind of analysis normally reserved for enterprise intelligence centers.
And features like the Location AI bot allow you to run analysis and forecast timelines based on the latest global events.
Yeah, and it can process over 20 languages in under 60 seconds. It's honestly incredible.
Really is a game changer.
So if you want to bypass the noise and get AI-powered news on demand, I highly urge you to subscribe at www.stylonews.com.
You won't regret it.
Switching gears for a moment, we just want to thank you so much for joining us and listening to this deep dive today.
It's been a pleasure.
Please reach out and request topics for future explorations, and make sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
But before we conclude, connecting everything we've discussed today back to the bigger picture raises one final critical question.
What's that?
Well, with the entire world closely watching this 60-day negotiation window established in Geneva, what exactly happens on day 61 if all these regional proxy networks have simply used the ceasefire to rearm, reposition, and prepare for the next phase of conflict?
Wow, yeah, it really makes you realize that calm, static 1960s news desk we talked about at the beginning, it was an illusion. The map is always moving. Stay informed, and we'll see you next time.